Is your dirt bike not starting or running well and you're wondering if it's running rich or lean? Well, I want to show you the basic symptoms and signs so that you can know whether it's rich or lean, and then what to do next so that your dirt bike starts easy and runs reliably. So what does it mean when your dirt bike is running rich or lean? Well, it's simply when the air to fuel ratio is not optimum or most efficient. And well, what does that mean? Well, the best air to fuel ratio is about 14.7 to 1. But for someone simple like me, that basically just means that there needs to be a certain amount of air getting sucked in through the air box, through the carb, through the engine, combined with the right mixture of fuel being sucked through the carburetor or fuel injection system. And when it's the optimum ratio, this is when the engine is going to run and burn that mixture most efficiently. Because if there's too much, it's not going to run well. And if there's not enough gas or air, then it's not going to run well either. So here are some simple signs and symptoms that your dirt bike is running rich. One, it's hard to start, and when it's rich, it's generally harder to start when the engine is hot, and this is because as the engine warms up, it needs less fuel. So when it's colder, that's why you use the choke, because it needs more fuel to get started and run. So when it's hot and it's not starting as easily, it requires more kicks. This is one sign that it's too rich. Rich sign number 2 is when you don't need to use the choke when the engine is cold. So if the engine is air temperature, 70 degrees out or 50 or whatever it is, and you can start the bike easily within 2 to 5 kicks and you're not using the choke, that's a good sign that it's running too rich, because the choke either restricts the air or it adds more fuel, which richens the mixture. And if you don't need that, which you should, because engines generally need more fuel when they're colder until the engine is fully warmed up and the engine has better compression, better sealing, so it doesn't need as much gas. Rich sign number 3 is poor throttle response. So when you give it gas, you turn the throttle, and it's blah, 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 blah. And it's just not very smooth, really crisp. If it's kind of stuttering, hesitating, that's a good sign that the engine is running rich. Rich sign number 4 is it's lacking power. So maybe it doesn't stutter, but when you hold the throttle wide open, get up into the upper RPM range, and it just doesn't feel like it has a lot of power, or it feels like it's hitting the rev limiter too soon. This could be a sign that it's running too rich. Rich sign number 5 is it's smoking. Now, some smoke is completely normal, especially if you're riding a 2-stroke, because they have oil in the gas. So it's going to have more smoke, or some smoke, especially when you first start it up. Or even if you have a 4-stroke and it's smoking a little bit on the cold start, this could just be some moisture in the exhaust or the engine that's burning out. But if it's smoking excessively, or it's a really smelly smoke, it's sweet, or it smells like oil or burnt gas, this is a sign that it's probably running rich. Sign number 6 that it's running rich is if you're following spark plugs. So when there's too much fuel in the air to fuel ratio, this is going to be too much for the spark plug to ignite and burn efficiently. So all that fuel is going to continue building up in the engine, and the spark plug won't be able to ignite it. So what happens? Well, that fuel eventually just soaks the spark plug, and this is what fouls it, so the bike stops running. So if you're constantly replacing spark plugs, that's a sign that your bike's running rich. Rich sign number 7 is when you see spooge out the exhaust. So what is spooge? Well, it's that black, oily, thick, sludgy stuff that's running down the silencer of your dirt bike. It's generally on a 2-stroke, and while a little bit is normal over a long period of time, if oil is spitting out or running out every single ride, and it's a lot of it, that's a good sign that your bike is running too rich. There's too much fuel and or oil in the mixture. Rich sign number 8 is when the engine floods over easily. So what is flooding over? Well, when the carb and or the engine is getting too much gas stuck in it because the air fuel ratio is too rich, the bike is going to be a lot harder to start, and it's going to eventually cause poor throttle response and spark plug fouling. So how do you know the bike is flooded? Well, if it's harder to start when it's hot, or if you have to give it full throttle gas to kickstart it and it's a lot easier. So you hold the throttle open, you kickstart it or push the electric start, and it starts really easily compared to not using the throttle, that's a good sign that your engine is flooding over. And this can happen more easily if you tip over, especially with the car, because gas is more likely to flood into the engine. But if you're not tipping over and you're like riding at low RPM and you stop the engine and it's harder to start or harder to restart, that's a good sign that the engine is flooding over because it's too rich. Rich sign number 9 is when you have poor fuel efficiency. So if your dirt bike, let's say you have a Honda CRF 230F, if you're riding trails averaging 15 miles an hour, you should be getting at least 40, probably close to 50 miles per gallon. So when it has a 2-gallon tank, you should be able to go 50 to 70 miles before even needing to turn the reserve on. So if you have another bike, just compare your fuel range or mileage to other people with the same bike. And if you have to fill up your gas tank a lot sooner than others, well, you might be using too high RPM, you might be in the wrong gear, but this is also a sign that your bike is jetted too rich, so it's sucking more fuel through than you need to. It's not burning it efficiently. So you could be saving money on gas and wear and tear on your parts. Rich sign number 10 is when the bike runs worse at higher elevation. Now, if it's running perfectly fine, if you're at 1,000 feet like we are here in Minnesota, but then you go out to the mountains at 8, 9, 10, 12,000 foot elevation and the bike runs worse, well, it's naturally going to run richer because there's less air, there's less oxygen in the air. So this automatically changes the air to fuel ratio even if you didn't even touch the carb, which means it's going to be running rich, and you need to change the jetting. You need to lean it out so that it runs more efficiently. It's not going to have the same power, but it's going to start more easily, and it's going to have smooth throttle response once you get the air to fuel mixture correct. Now let's talk about the symptoms and signs that your bike is running lean. Sign number 1 is when the engine is really hard to start when it's cold. So it doesn't mean that the air temperature has to be 30 degrees Fahrenheit, but when the engine is air temperature, so it's like the first time you're starting it for the day, that's a cold engine. And if it's harder to start when the engine is cold, as opposed to when the engine is hot, it's easier to start, that's a good sign that the air to fuel ratio is too lean. And again, what does too lean mean? Well, it means there's more air and not enough fuel in the mixture. Lean sign number 2 is if you have a high idle. It's a good practice to not adjust your idle until the engine is fully warmed up. But if it is fully warmed up and it's idling really high, higher than it should, so instead of it's 2 or 4 stroke, and you try changing the idle and it can go down, but then it goes back up. This is a good sign that it's too lean, whether the jetting needs to be corrected or there's an air leak. Lean sign number 3 is similar to number 2, but it's a hanging idle. So what is a hanging idle? Well, when you give it gas, you rum, and then the RPM is supposed to come back down because you let off the throttle, but it hangs there. It stays high. So rum, it takes a while to come back down. That's a hanging idle, and that's a good sign that your bike is running too lean because of the jetting or an air leak. Lean sign number 4 is an abrupt or snappy throttle response. So if it was too rich, it'd be kind of a really lame throttle response, where if it's too lean, it's going to be really sharp, really snappy. The bike feels really jerky, especially at a lower gear, a high RPM, and the bike just feels like it wants to fly out from underneath you. This could be from having too much bike, but if it feels uncontrollable, this could mean that your bike is running too lean. Lean sign number 5 is your dirt bike is overheating more easily. So all dirt bikes, they need a certain amount of airflow going past them, whether they have radiators or it's air cooled. But the second way to reduce the heat from an engine is getting more fuel through it. Because the fuel, if it's a 4-stroke, as it goes by, it keeps the valves cool, the piston and rings. So if there's not enough fuel, if it's running too lean, the engine is going to get hotter faster. But if you know your bike isn't running lean and it is getting hotter faster, so coolant is boiling out or it's steaming out the overflow on the radiator hose, this could just be that your clutch control is not very efficient. And if so, I got a video in the description below on clutch control so that you don't overheat. Lean sign number 6 is when your dirt bike bogs when accelerating, whether it's partial throttle or full throttle. So what is a bog? It sounds like the engine is dying and then it accelerates, or it just dies and stalls out. So if it sounds like the engine's dying, it's bogging, that's a good sign that your dirt bike is running too lean. Sign number 7 is when your dirt bike runs worse at lower elevation. So maybe you live out in the mountains or just at higher elevation, above 4,000 or 5,000 feet, and your bike runs well, and then you bring it down to sea level or 1,000 feet, and the bike runs worse. So it's harder to start, it doesn't have good throttle response, it bogs. This is a good sign that it's too lean because there's more oxygen in the air, meaning more air is going to get through the engine and not enough fuel. You need to add fuel for it to run and burn efficiently. And whether you have a 2-stroke or 4-stroke, it's important to start with the air or fuel screw, which is a finer tuning adjustment of the pilot jet. So you can adjust this before you even take the pilot jet out of the carb. And if you want to learn how to tune the fuel or air screw in just a few minutes, whether you have a 2-stroke or 4-stroke, I got a free guide, a PDF guide that's really quick, practical, and easy to learn. You can grab that in the description below. So grab that and let me know what you think. Was this helpful for you? And if you're a trail rider, let me know what you want to see next.